Hello there! In the last video I showed you a super easy method for studying and improving your characters by deconstructing and variating the art of other artists. In this video I will go over a technique that will allow you to level up your characters by studying more and more complex things. Now keep in mind that this video requires you to watch the video from before, otherwise it will be hard to understand. And another thing, this video is a lesson taken directly from my upcoming course on character design I'm working on. If you would like me to help me during the production and get it for free once it's ready, right now I'm making my special 10 courses bundle available again. That's 10 full courses on character design, background design, game art and Inkscape, about 70 plus hours of content, all for $19. It's only for a limited time, until I finish the course. After that the bundle will be no longer available, and those who purchase it will get the course for free. That was all, continuing with the lesson. If you completed the exercises as I recommended, you've likely noticed how fun and effective this method is for learning. It's an excellent way to really embed knowledge into your memory. Additionally, it's a fantastic approach to tackle something that feels just out of reach, something more complex that you feel ready for. And this is what this lesson is going to be about. I'm sure you've encountered drawings that seem a bit too complex. Maybe you gave them a try and failed to copy them or felt overwhelmed. The next few lessons will deal with that, learning to see and understand, and of course study, more complex drawings, so you can draw more complex things. And first, we are going to see a technique that's very well known and really basic, and that can be really helpful with any character, not just with the complex ones. In fact, if you've experimented with the method yourself, chances are you've probably came with something similar. I don't think it has a name, but I call it layering, because you use different layers of shapes or mannequins, as we named them in the last lesson, to get the final result. Take a look at this illustration. This is the sort of drawing that would have intimidated me a few months ago, before I had a systematic way to approach it. Perhaps it doesn't intimidate you, but hopefully you can see it's a bit more complex than the examples from the previous lessons. If we trace all the shapes that affect the design, like in the last lesson, we'll end up with something like this. Every shape matches with an element of the drawing, something that affects the design. If we want now, we can very easily make a copy, because everything fits perfectly. It is not really that hard to do once you have this. What it is hard to do is to get to these shapes to begin with. Because there are so many, it's kinda difficult to copy on its own. It's still easier than going straight in without any shape, because they are simple shapes, but it's not as easy as it could be. However, there is a very obvious solution to this problem if you think about it, and that is using different layers of mannequins. We start with a very easy to draw and simple mannequin that matches the big shapes, and then we use that mannequin to build a new one for the finer details. And we repeat these steps until we get to the final mannequin, the one we are gonna use to add the line art. That was so hard to get to. So looking at the example of this knight, let's follow the full process until we get to the line art. The very first layer should be simplify the illustration as much as possible, using as few shapes as you can while completely matching it. So you have to balance and evaluate what is really important and what's worth a shape. In this case, I thought to use a single shape for the torso, another for the head. The legs, I decided to join them as a single shape. To me, it helps me being more accurate when they are not straight and parallel to each other. And the cape could have been a single shape, but I don't know why I separated it into two. Usually at this stage it won't be necessary to use more than 4 or 5 shapes for it to feel like the original drawing. And here are a few more examples of other mannequins at this first layer. Stop the video and study them if you need. From here we could jump directly to the final mannequin, using the proportions and shape to build on top, but if the illustration is complex enough, we could also add another mannequin in between. For this mannequin there is a bit more detail. You can think of it as increasing the resolution, detailing the smaller shapes, like the shoulder plate or the loincloth and the arms and separation of the legs. And more examples of this level of mannequin. With this in place, it's easier to build that difficult mannequin we saw earlier. This is the final one. At this stage, every important design element in the character should be simplified into a simple shape, just like in the last lesson. The only difference here is that there are a ton of elements to simplify, but otherwise it's the same, that hopefully you practiced a lot. A few examples of this final layer. And now with the final mannequin, the line art is easy to make. A good mannequin that follows correctly the drawing is a bit like one of those grids that people starting out used to make copying easier. Only that we have the flexibility of drawing it in any way we want. And yes, it may take some practice to get used to copying more complex things, like with everything in art, but after you get comfortable, the line art stage becomes the most mindless stage of the study. And here we have the copy of a fairly complex drawing done, but moving on, a couple of things to keep in mind. First, this is such a basic technique that you can use it with anything, including simple illustrations. If it's not something really super basic, you will get some benefit out of doing it in at least 2 layers. More on this later on the course. Though using it adds a bit of an overhead to the process, so if it's not necessary, don't use it. And second, usually there's not gonna be necessary to use more than 3 layers. Most drawings you can use 2, a simple layer that handles the body and other main shapes, and a second layer with the final mannequin. So don't go overboard on the quantity of layers, adding too many layers won't make it easier to draw. Okay, but now it's time to apply the layers to the explorative copy method from last lesson. Everything will stay more or less the same, but I do have a couple of tips I want to share. If you remember from before, the first step is to find mannequins by tracing over. And I strongly recommend you to first find all the mannequins you are gonna use before you get to the method. This is more important now because you may need to adjust them or even change them. Making these mannequins by tracing is not particularly hard, but it's not unusual for the first one you make to suck and not be as simple or as easy as it could be. So before drawing anything, take a good time to make all the mannequins you're gonna use. That will also get you familiar with the reference, which will make it even easier to draw later on. The way I recommend you to make variation now is by first going by layers. So you make multiple variations of the first layer before moving on to the next one and so forth. This is useful because it makes you hyper familiar with the current layer you are working on and with the essence of the design. The same tips than before apply. Draw between 5 to 15 copies. Create as much variety as you can while matching the pose and perspective, and try to create diversity in design by variating different groups of shapes. As you can see, some of my mannequins have big heads and short bodies, while others have small heads and huge bodies. I even messed up with the cape, since it's an important part of the design as well. Now we move to the next layer. This time we are not tracing over, so we only have the previous mannequin to guide us. That means this step is probably gonna be the hardest. Still, what's nice now is that we can add some extra variety, because we don't have to stay to the proportions found in the traced mannequin. Now we have true creative power, and that means we have to learn to improvise. You'll notice that some of these mannequins have such different proportions to the original that I needed to make some adjustments. For example, in this one, the legs are so small that the loincloth hides most of the back leg, something it does not happen in the original. And this one, the arms are so big that they cover a big portion of the torso, including completely obscuring the belt. Also, you'll notice that I have to improvise a few very bizarre swords to match the new location of the arms. The final layer, the final mannequin. This time it's just a matter of adapting the traced mannequin into the new proportions. That means some parts of it will have to be either omitted, or in some cases you'll have to improvise some sections. In this case, the mannequin with the short legs that I mentioned a second ago, the left leg was just too short. I couldn't fit all the 3 pieces of armor, so I decided I would just omit the one on the knee. And for the big guy with the big arms, like I said before, the arm covers a big portion of the torso, so there were quite a lot of things I couldn't draw. When you have these mannequins done, it is very easy to imagine how the final illustration could look, so if you're not fully convinced of the variation by this stage, chances are that making the line art on top is not gonna do much for you. So you know you can save time by scrapping that variation. And then the final stage is just adapting the line art. Here comes the reward for your hard labor. where you get to see new cool variations made entirely by you. It is also where you apply the ability to improvise based on reference, the same as before, but even more weightful now because the designs are more complex. Not much to say here other than I switched the symbol of the sun that was everywhere on the night for a much simpler circle, because it was super complex and it added nothing and it took ages to draw. That's the same reason why I only made 4 variations. You, on the other hand, try to keep it to at least 5, even on complex studies. So, to summarize, if you find a character too complex, you always have the options of studying it using layers, which means building mannequins one on top of another, increasing in complexity, until you reach a final, kinda complex mannequin that you will use to add the line art. The first layer of mannequin should match the design with no more than 4 or 5 big shapes, and the final one should have as many shapes as necessary to match it completely. So it's easier to add the final line art on top later. Usually you won't need more than 2 or 3 layers of mannequins to handle even the most complex illustrations. Remember to find the shapes first and then move on to make variations. It is really helpful to have this base version to guide you. When making variations, it's easier to variate in stages, keeping it at 1 layer at a time. Now for the exercises. Find 10 drawings that you think are just above your level, that intimidates you, but that you feel you could tackle it with effort. The same limitations from before apply. For now, stay to characters in a relatively neutral standing pose, and stay away from all sorts of anatomy. Then, of course, you study them using our method, like I show you here. Follow the 3 steps, finding the mannequins, variating them, and drawing the line art. And that was it for this YouTube video. I'm still working hard on the course and I think the next few videos will be lessons from it. So if you're interested in learning more, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Also, any like and comment would help me and the channel a lot. Thanks for watching and see you next video. Bye.